The August, September special, and October minutes. Commissioners, y'all have had those. Are there any changes, additions, or subtractions that need to be made? If not, I will entertain a motion. And I was told we can have one motion for...
You want it for all of them?
Yes.
I move that we approve all four of the minutes from the previous four meetings.
I've got a motion to approve the minutes from the previous four meetings. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. And I'm now turning my phone ringer off. I suggest everybody does that if you're as forgetful as I am. First item on the agenda is ZC 1916. This is a public hearing to consider the request of the Retirement Systems of Alabama to establish an initial zoning of Tourist Resort District conditional upon annexation to the city of Fairhope. Yes, sir.
Evening, Commissioners. Mike Jeffries, City Planner for the City of Fairhope. As you said, this is conditional annexation to the Tourist Resort District, known as ZC 19.16, Watershed West. This is a public hearing to consider the request of Goodwin Mills and Kaywood for a conditional annexation to Tourism Resort District that amends the original Tourism Resort District established by RSA on behalf of the Retirement Systems of Alabama, known as RSA. The subject property is approximately 7.23 acres and is currently unzoned in Baldwin County. It's located on the south side of Old Battles Road across from Pavner Place subdivision. The property lies between the current Lakewood Azalea Golf Course holes 2 and 3. If approved, the subject property would be designated as a low-rise residential zone in the TR district. On your screen, on the left side, you can see our zoning map showing that the previously zoned TR district to the east, to the north is zoned planned unit development, or a PUD, and R1 zoning. To the west is unzoned, and to the south is all unzoned Baldwin County property. On the right is an aerial, the subject property outlined in white. And you can see the golf course on the left and right side, and the trees located in the center. This is a topographic survey of the property, showing pretty much the same general description that is outlined here. Just a few comments. This subject property was subdivided out in 2006, case SD 06.08, Colony at the Grand North subdivision. The approval of a waiver from the stormwater standards was also approved, stating that the drainage calculations and plans will be provided at the time each parcel is individually subdivided or developed. There is a current subdivision application containing 10 lots that was submitted due to the required community meeting for major subdivisions. It is not being held until the December 2nd, 2019 Planning Commission agenda. The proposed site contains a mixture of trees, predominantly live oaks and pines. During the subdivision application, proper tree protection would be required per Fairhope subdivision regulations, and if it is annexed into the city, Fairhope's tree and landscape ordinance would also be applicable. The TR district has a criteria that the overall density for all residential areas shall be no greater than 3.5 units per gross acre within all the acreage comprising the entire TR district. Just to note that the proposed 10-lot subdivision, which is 1.38 units per acre, would give the TR district a total of 3 units per acre. And the TR district also has a criteria that it provides at least 20% open space or green space. Currently, there's 63.8 acres, which exceeds the required 20% green space. And I'll turn it over to the commissioners for any questions.
All right. Any questions for staff at this time? Thank you, Mike. Just for those in the audience who may or may not have been here before, this is a zoning request with conditional annexation. When the Planning and Zoning Commission, look at zonings, we actually do not have the authority because the zoning actually becomes an ordinance, so only the City Council and Robert Brown will actually have the final choice. He'll vote on that it's the City Council. We'll make a recommendation to the City Council. Sometimes the City Council people will vote on the Planning and Zoning Commission to make the recommendation one way or the other. Sometimes they'll abstain because they want to wait, later to, make their final decision. But in the zoning, we look at the comprehensive plan, and we look at the growth of the area to make those decisions of the recommendations. After that, an area like this has to come back for a general subdivision meeting, and what that does, that's when we look at more of the technical stuff of, are the roads long enough? Is the water retention work, does it meet all the subdivision regs? And that's more technical issues and not so much, personal choice of do we like it or do we not. So that's kind of how we're set up. So at this time, I will open the public hearing.
Mike, I left out the staff's recommendation. Staff's recommendation is conditional approval upon that the use shall be limited to single-family residential dwellings and accessory structures only.
Okay,
One to add.
thank you. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion before you start proceed with the public hearing. Tourist Resort District is kind of almost like an anomaly in this city. It was designed strictly for one user, and that was the Grand Hotel or Lakewood proper. To be able to have a tourist resort district, you gotta have a hotel, you gotta have a golf course, you gotta have a marina. I don't know how many places there are in Fairhope that we could get all that done, but there's not very many. In other words, there's only one.
Maybe if we annex Lake Forest.
Yeah, that probably would work too. But with that in mind, there are some things that have come up about the tourist resort district that I think we really need to go back and study before we open a can of worms on this. And I would move myself, I have my own feelings about it, but in the essence of fairness, I would like to move at this moment that we postpone or table this until the December meeting so that we can research and look at this tourist resort district in detail.
Okay.
Because it was done in 2006, and basically everybody on this planning commission, maybe with the exception of you, has only been on here for an extremely short period of time, and I just think it would behoove us to do that.
I have a motion to hold this over to the next meeting. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? I think that's a great idea also. Even though I was on here, I need to reread that start to finish. And by the time I got the packet, I haven't, gotten to get back into it as much as I need to. And there are a lot of questions that I have. So all in favor of holding this over to the December meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, holding this over to the December meeting, say aye. All right, the motion passes unanimously. This will be brought back up. And the public hearing will still be open. So when we come back on the December meeting, this will be the first item. And the names that we have will be able to speak at that time. Thank you.
That's fine.
I just don't understand. Especially as it relates to the interior of this golf course.
Well, but the rest of it's like that. I mean, the rest of that's already done. This is already, they're already homes in those fingers. Not these.
But I'm gonna tell you what, a lot of these, there are areas that are on the outside of these that are substantially more significant than this, what's gonna happen with this one right here.
Yeah.
Especially when you got the new golf cart path coming behind the fence, and it's entering and exiting
Where
of
they're
there on
driving
the Battles
across.
Road, and somebody get run over. Or, when you think about this, health, safety, and welfare, it's not just a person that's gonna get run over, a golfer that's gonna get run over, whoever's driving the vehicle.
Yeah.
And then you talk about 10 houses, and where kids going? Be in the middle of
Freezing
the
all day
day.
today. Oh, yeah.
And then I don't want
Golf hours,
to
whatever.
take people pictures, so.
Well, I mean, yeah.
But just like all of this, and all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying it's not much different from that. You know?
No, but that's around the fringe of the golf course. all this is the fringe of the golf course.
Yes,
But you do have an
but the
area.
one side is the same. I mean, this is one-sided and I mean, I don't like either, but I'm just not that.
Well, the whole thing about it is now, with the endangered threat species living there, we got eagles, bald eagles in there. So,
Because there's so much green space. Well, probably.
Yes, sir, Buford. The
And-
next item on the agenda is SD 1940, consideration of the request of Ryan Krill and Vincent A. Booth for a site plan approval for 10 Tops at Gay for a 20-unit multi-occupancy project.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commissioners. And so, as the Chairman said, we have a multiple occupancy project for your consideration. And we'll explain, as you can see on the cover page up here on the screens, we're recommending tabling for further study. And Commissioners, as we typically do, we have your zoning map as well as an aerial image on your screens and in your packet. The subject property, you'll see the subject property on the zoning map on your left, and the subject property is noted in the crosshatched area. This is located in unzoned Baldwin County, and then you have your aerial image on the right showing some of the nearby streets for you to get your orientation. I've added also a standalone aerial map with some of the balloons removed, so that way the subject property is a bit easier to see. And just to summarize, just to reiterate, as the chairman mentioned, you can see the property information on the screen before you right there. And subject property is 5.31 acres approximately. 20 units are requested, which is approximately 3.77 units per acre. And as we mentioned earlier, this is in unzoned Baldwin County and Baldwin County Planning District 17. And the requirement for the neighborhood meeting was conducted. A brief look at the site plan for the site itself, Commissioners, on your screens and in your packet. What I would call to the Planning Commission's attention from this drawing is that we're using the new green space requirements for MOPs. And so this translated into a 20% green space requirement, which comes to 1.07 acres. 1.07 acres of green space, which is furnished, and though it's difficult to see in here, that is preserved in the site data table on this drawing. Commissioners, for your consideration, I have the drainage plan right on this screen and the drawing before you right there. Just a couple of notes that as designed, the stormwater flows post-development are less than or equal to pre-development flows, and the total suspended solids removal is 82.5%, which meets the 80% requirement for the subdivision regulations for drainage. A few quick notes for you, Commissioners. Traffic study, and we had correspondence from the engineer of record that indicate that the proposed project would not generate the 1,000 daily trips or the 50 peak trips necessary to trigger a traffic study. So a traffic study is not a component of this development. The utilities, electrical, water, sewer, and natural gas, are all provided by Fairhope Public Utilities. Just a note that this is an MOP and not a traditional subdivision. So staff reserves the right to require easements, maintenance bonds, or warranties for any utilities to be dedicated to the city of Fairhope. And then just to reiterate briefly about the drainage system, there are 4 low-impact development techniques that are used. You'll see the sand filter, dry retention basin, grass line swales, and inline storage. And as we indicated earlier, the aggregate of those is 82.5% TSS removal, which is, again, is in compliance with the subdivision regulations. Commissioners, we're recommending to table this for further study, and the reason for that recommendation for tabling is, if you notice in Article 5, Section F3B, staff are concerned about the plan to mitigate damage to downstream property. One of the outlet control structures shown on the drawing that we saw previously discharges to an adjacent piece of private property. We've got the PPIN of that property listed right there. That property does not appear to contain a natural drainage way near its common lot line with the subject property. And it does appear there's a natural drainage basin on the extreme northeast corner of that piece of property, but not located adjacent to the subject property. If If it is the pleasure of the Planning Commission to go ahead and approve this development, what we wanted to go ahead and do is provide some conditions of approval if it is the pleasure of the Planning Commission to proceed. And what I wanted to be very clear is that you see on the slide right there, the staff acknowledges as designed the drainage system proposed is in compliance with the subdivision regulations as far as the flows, the TSS removal, as far as the technical design. But again, reiterating what we saw on the previous slide about the discharge to the adjacent property. But if it is the pleasure of the commission to proceed, condition approval 1 would be a drainage easement to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission's legal counsel. Shall be prepared and recorded for conveyance of stormwater outfall from that outfall structure across PPIN 24268. Verbalizing one additional word in there, Commissioners, prior to land disturbance activities. I inadvertently omitted that from the staff report. And then the remainder are our typical conditions of approval that we use for MOPs because of the MOP not having a final plat process. So item 2 right there is referring to the various landscape buffers. This piece of property only adjoins one area of property zoned residential within the city of Fairhope. So what staff would ask the Planning Commission to consider if they did proceed with approving is requiring that same landscape buffer from the landscape ordinance around the remaining pieces of property that are unzoned. And so the various PPINs are listed right there. A note and a request from Mr. Peterson, Utilities Director of Operations, that the water meter serving each unit be placed on each side of the driveway respective to the unit, in lieu of both meters located on one side of the driveway as shown on drawing CO4. So a bit of housekeeping there. And then item 4, Commissioners, is the typical condition of approval that we put on MOPs. So that way we get our as-built drawings, our O&M, our recorded O&M agreement, and those types of documents, kind of like what we get with a typical subdivision. And this is a condition of approval you've seen several times from previous MOPs. Commissioners, I'm happy to answer questions on behalf of staff. Mr. Larry Smith is the engineer of record, and he's here on behalf of the developer.
Thank you, Buford. Would anybody here like to make a presentation on behalf of the developer?
Larry, help yourself.
Thank you. Buford did a great job, as always, kind of describing the intent of the project. There are a few things, and I've discussed it with Richard Johnson and Buford about the overall recommendation on the tabling of further study. There is not a defined channel, but that is not the requirement when you are discharging runoff onto the natural flow path of the runoff. We cannot concentrate it, and that's what we've done. We've incorporated a level spreader. We pulled outfall further away from the property line to be able to allow that flow to continue in the path that it currently does. If that's going to be the new stance of the city, is that every time you want to develop a piece of property, you have to either get an easement or be discharging into a natural drainage channel, then any piece of property that doesn't have that's going to become undevelopable. I can't send it to another area that it doesn't currently flow to, or then I'm going to be increasing the runoff to those pieces of property. I mean, we've tried to do everything we can to minimize the impacts. We're meeting all the requirements, and we are putting in a level spreader to disseminate the runoff and allow it to go back off the property in a sheet flow manner. We're reduced the rate of runoff. We've complied with it. We're actually on the green space side. I mean, if you look how large this piece of property is and the amount of green space, we didn't calculate every piece of landscaping on the property. We just stopped when we hit the required amount of green space. So this property could be a lot denser. It's just not what the whole goal of the development was. We shot for 20 units, low impact. We've got gravel roads going around it. I really think it's a good use of the property. I mean, a big metal warehouse building could go on it tomorrow and we'd never even be before y'all. But that's not what they want to do here. They're trying to do everything the right way. So that was the first thing. The other issue I had was trying to stretch the landscape buffer requirement around the entire property versus where it's required to be. I prefer not to, or my client would prefer not to extend that landscape buffer. We are going to landscape it. We have Joe Comer doing the landscape plan, but we'd be much rather, landscape in the areas where we think it makes the most sense versus doing just a linear thing around the site. So I'm here. I know there's probably some people here to speak about it, so I'll be back up whenever, unless y'all have some questions for me.
Are there any questions?
I had some,
Yes, ma'am.
because we didn't, in our packet, we have the site plan, but we didn't have the grading and drainage plan.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it's not clear where the 40 parking spaces are either, but he flipped past one quickly, but I
Yeah.
couldn't really,
Yeah.
can you walk us through the grading and drainage plan and show us where the level spreader is and all
Yeah,
that?
I'll go through everything. The parking's the easier one, so I'm going to just walk up unless there's a laser pointer. Is this a laser? No? All right. That's all right.
Hang on, Larry. There you go.
All right.
But you have to watch it on the screen right there.
Yeah, I can manage that. All right, so each of the units has a single car garage. And so one is within the building and the other parking space is within their concrete pad in front. So each unit has 2 parking spaces. This
Okay.
loop here is a gravel loop up to the point where we need fire department access. And so that section is paved, which is just your main entry feature. Then on the drainage side, what we have here is everything from the front of the buildings going, oops. Yeah. I've got some pretty good computer skills. Spend all day on them. Other than I can hit the mouse every once in a while when I shouldn't. So going around the front of all the buildings flow into the center courtyard. The center courtyard has a sand infiltration that is connected to the pond in the back. So as it percolates in to the sand infiltration, it'll go into this inlet and then it will end up back here. We had very poor soils on site. They were, I think, type D soils, which are not going to infiltrate naturally.
Okay, that was my next question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we tried to create an infiltration to get the required TSS removal. So we create a sand chimney
Okay.
here that's tied to an inlet box here that bubbles out into this larger pond here. That pond has got 1 to 6 side slopes, so it can be mowed. When it's dry outside, it can be used as a play field for any of the kids in the neighborhood. The same goes for this. This is a low area. I'm calling it a low area. It's about 1 foot depression that
Okay.
can also be utilized by the neighborhood as a common area. It recovers within 24 hours of a rain event and ends up in the ponds back here. And
Okay.
so then the overall drainage characteristics, and this is what I was referring to as if you don't have a natural basin, this is at the ridge. If you look at the overall GIS topo for this whole area, this is kind of the breaking point. And there's a ridge that runs through this property. Part of it will flow. There's an existing Grady pond here that we maintain the buffers on. And then it discharges into the right-of-way of Gayfer, flows up underneath Gayfer, heading to the east, goes under the culverts at Bishop, and then flows north. This section here discharges right into this corner here, and it flows across the property that Buford was mentioning, and then it turns and heads to the intersection of Dyer and Bishop, goes under Bishop Road, and then goes back up underneath Dyer in that low area. As part of this, we did a study on that, which does have existing issues. That road overtops Dyer, overtops in that low area. I don't know if y'all have ever been back there. But we did a study just to make sure we weren't putting any increased burden on that system, and we've actually reduced the rate with what we've done on our property to that crossing. It's still going to overtop, but we're not going to make it do it more frequently than it currently does. So we studied the entire basin here that would flow to that area. And
Wait a minute. Now, when it goes out to south, would be the northwest corner, it goes over toward there, but it hits that draw that runs through there and then runs east
yes,
toward Bishop?
correct.
Okay.
And the level spreader, you don't happen to have the detail in here of it, do you? No. So originally, the original design, this basically came out to here, the pond and outfall. And what we did is we pulled the outfall back. We created a depression here that's lined with riprap. And then this little band you see right here is a concrete overflow that's at a 0 grade. And so it's disseminating any flow that comes out of that outfall structure over a 64 feet span, which will mimic the existing condition, the existing topo, which you can't really see here. There's basically contour here, and the low point's right here in the corner. And so we're putting it in the same area, and we're trying to disseminate it over a 64-foot flat area that will release it into that same corner where it currently flows.
Any further questions? If not, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. The first person's name to be listed is Ann Taylor Blower.
Probably eventually will when they come
Some pretty trees that showed up on the survey. Okay, so that's 6. Wasn't
Good evening.
clear about where that was.
I'm Ann Taylor Blower.
And if you'll state your address also for the record, please, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
It's Blauer. I do not have property adjacent to the property in question, but I fear that several neighborhoods near this area will be unduly affected by the storm runoff. And if I might pass some photographs? I've lived at North Rolling Oaks area for 31 years. And if you know the area, South Rolling Oaks streets and North Rolling Oaks are affected quite a bit by runoff. Our lot in the middle of several lots is the drainage area, which is normally dry if we've had no rain. But you'll see by pictures here, it becomes a lake when we do have rain. And this is not just every several years, it's quite often every year, to the point that South Rolling Oaks, which is 15 houses, have to drive through a foot to 2 feet of water over your main street. Water also covers a private road that leads into the area you're seeing. But Rolling Oaks Lane, which is on one side of my property, a culvert and bridge has been washed out 3 times. And there's now 3 houses that depend on that access point. So we're concerned about the runoff. It sounds like they've done a lot of studying, researching and whatnot, but the water's got to go somewhere from the hard roofs and driveways and whatnot. And by the way, the water that comes through North Rolling Oaks and through our lake area ultimately goes through Auburn's land and has been known to close County Road 13 several times, numerous times. In fact, Richard Johnson is well aware, because we had a previous proposal when he was county engineer, and he's well aware of the drainage issues in this area and what they can lead to. So I appreciate your time, appreciate your concern.
Thank you, Ms. Blower. Next person on the list is Dean Cook.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Dean Cook. By the way, that's German spelling, K-O-C-H. Okay. The address is on Silver Hill, County Road 49, and the number is 20401. Okay? Thank you. I thought I knew what I wanted to talk to you about, but after watching the discussion here, it's almost really confusing. Number one, terminology is certainly high in the world of civil engineering, even though I've been in on building power plants all around the world for 30 years. So the first thing is, I have a video that was made 10 years ago showing the extreme flooding when this piece of property was up for consideration in 2009, and the project did not go forward. But it shows the flooding that she is speaking of in great detail, where the city truck is parked on one side and the people are on the other side, and they dared not cross because they know that the road washes out. So that's what brings me here. I don't live in there, but I had neighbors and friends for many years. I own the property that's the northern border, and that's where this discussion kind of threw me a curve tonight. We've owned that property for 72 years. I grew up there. We've seen the water flows and which goes where and what fills up and what not for many, many years, despite whatever surveying says. And I have filmed and taken a lot of pictures through the years of the ditches, the directions of flow, how much is in it. I was hoping to be able to show a video, but I understood we needed to get it into the right format, and I've had that converted. But the video is 7 minutes long. If you're going to rehear, I'd rather show you that. It's very dramatic. I know after the Fairhope Council looked at it the last time, they said, I didn't know we had whitewater rafting right here. So it was pretty impressive to it. My concern on the flow, here's the issue to me. This area called wetlands, I believe, is your terminology for it, which to us was a swamp, because you grow up there, things are swamps. It holds a lot of water, and water flows down into it and fills it to whatever level. That then proceeds down Gayfer to the east, goes under about an 18-inch culvert, which is filled whenever the rains come, goes a little further and turns and goes through kind of a wooded valley down to where the lady was speaking of. All of these 23 homes are down in Rolling Oaks. And anytime you have a heavy rain, that pond is going to send that water through that culvert to the east down to Rolling Oaks. And it combines in with the ditch that drains most of the southern half of the Auburn Experiment Station. It's a very big ditch. It was put in the 50s. And then the landscape of the Auburn farm down there was shaped to where it goes down and goes in, feeds that ditch, goes under the road, joins the stream going to Rolling Oaks. And frankly, that water probably constitutes 85% maybe of the water that's given the big problem. But these other waters come in and join them, in particular all that can flow through that culvert that goes and feeds into Rolling Oaks. So there's this wetlands pond, whatever you want to call it, that fills because water on this 5 acres goes to it. And in the last few years, the 2 acres of land east of this 5 acres has had quite a bit of land filling. Trucks come in, dump dirt, and gets moved around. And it actually has closed off a good deal of the holding area of this wetland pond. That means the pond fills in a little faster than it did and is more sensitive to the rains, and out it comes through the culvert going to the east to get into the water issue. The other thing, when you were showing up on the diagram, that northwest corner, that's my land all across the north side. There is a low area that was in there, and yes, some water goes to a pond that Mr. Bishop dug in there many, many years ago. And I've been lucky enough to have received lots of truckloads of dirt to fill in that area. And I've been managing to get it up about at least 18 inches through the years to get that, what's up against your little left-hand upper green corner has been raised. I'm not sure your topo maps knows that. Maybe somebody looked and measured it. So it's not going to flow there. There was an area there that we dumped some dirt too to make sure that water stays to the owner of the water on the other side. So there is a little issue there, and I'm really surprised to hear that it's acknowledged in part of the plan. You were saying goes into that corner, and then it would go across the property some way, am I hearing, to go up to the big ditch on the north side of Dyer Road? Is that what I'm
That would be an
understanding?
answer, that would be a question for the developer.
Yeah.
He's on
Whoever
the
can
other
address
side.
that.
If you'll
Who am I
just ask
looking
the
at?
questions-
Larry.
Right
Sir,
here.
if you'll
Thank
just
you.
call, sir, if you'll just ask the questions, I'll get the developer back up and
Thank
ask
you.
him so that they get to the in the microphone and gets
Okay.
in the public record.
Fine. All right, and one point before I lose it. These 23 people in Rolling Oaks were not notified of anything going on that can send more water to them. I think they should have had a chance to get notified and put their input into this process, because you're downstream of the flow. And you'll see on the videos, if you look at that, I'll bring you, it really does flow that way, and it goes right on down to them. So I think they ought to have an opportunity to input to it. I wouldn't want to miss it if I knew more water could come to me if there's a problem with this development. Let's see, little things, though, that I can touch. This is kind of changing my tone away now. Because there was a project to be put there 10 years ago that did die off, they moved the setback 30 feet inland because there was going to be a 3-story building put quite close to our fence. So on this project, I'd like to get put in here that there would be a barrier wall that would help on vision and sound. And ever since that last request came 10 years ago, we have quit cutting the brush and the trees along the fence row. So we'd maybe have to grow our own barrier when a project did come along that would help on vision and noise. And the second purpose I'd like that wall put up is because I have a field there. And if you have children, you're going to know that the children who are going to live in a small area that's highly residential, they're going to go to the open area to play. And in the world today of lawsuits, I don't think I want to leave that opportunity staring them in the face to run over there and play softball or something on the field. So that's one request of it. Another request, these trees that have grown, quite a few of them are going to be right on the boundary line. Now, can a developer cut trees that's on the property line, or will they have to leave them alone? We're hoping they have to leave them alone. So I don't know who can address that, but it's been growing for quite a while, and there's going to be quite a few of those to be dealt with. The fence, in some cases, has grown into the trees, and bypassing the trees. So a little bit of an issue there. Now, a question I think someone can answer. 10 years ago, one of the solutions to the water problem would have been to dig a sand chimney. And that means to go down through layers until you can get into the pebbles and sand, which is basically where your water is. And then this would be gathered up and sent down into the sand chimney to go down into the water beneath the project. Well, Fairhope's wells and a water tank are 3/4 of a mile away from here. So I don't think any type of sand chimney of that nature should be considered.
That's not proposed here, and native doesn't allow those anyway.
Okay, I know there was one put up before. I think it was on Windmill Road, and I understand it was the first one ever put in this area.
Proposed, I don't think that was put in as proposed.
Good. All right, so that was one issue. As long as I understand that a sand chimney has nothing to do with boring through the layers and putting it down into the water. And you'll answer that then, okay? Let's see what else it was.
Sir, you need to.
Okay, drain
we're getting-
line.
We're getting. we need to
We'll
get moving
hustle
now,
it.
please,
I'm
sir.
right down to here,
All right,
okay?
let's go. Well, you're supposed to have 3.5 minutes, so I've been being very,
Well,
very
I
patient.
think most people would agree this topic might warrant more than that.
Let's go.
Okay. Are you using piping to conduct the water you gather on site to the holding pond?
It's not them that are doing it, the developer is, I'm gonna ask him in just a minute.
I can't look backwards and talk,
Yeah, I'm gonna ask
even though I
him
saw an
these
ad the other day on it. Okay, so that would be the last question I think I have for it, and thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you, yes,
Okay.
understood. Anybody else wish to speak to this item?
I didn't get a notification. My name is Carolyn Byers.
You need to come up and state your name and address in the microphone, please, ma'am.
My name is Carolyn Byers, and I did not get notified. I live on the corner. My house faces Bishop, runs along the side of Gayfer. And we've owned that property since 2004. I have a lot to agree with about this gentleman. I've been a witness to an awful lot of the water situation. I have to leave. I have another meeting, but I thought that I didn't get a notice about this. A neighbor informed me about this meeting. Is this meeting only about drainage? Because I had some other.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Living on that corner, I'm able to see and witness a lot of automobile accidents. Gayfer is open. There's a stop sign on Bishop. It's hard to see for people to come out. They have to get out into Gayfer. And I have pictures on my phone of a terrible accident last year right before school was out. We're having 48 units built on Bishop right 2 blocks from that corner. The school is being increased by 2/3 larger. There's 8 houses being built right across the street from the school. The traffic impact is a great concern of mine. What's going to happen? Perhaps if we put in a 4-way stop, that would help cut down the speed on Gayfer, because when they come from the traffic circle, they're wide open till they get to Greeno Road. Vroom. And if you are on Bishop wanting to get out on Gayfer, I mean, you've got taking it on a wing and a prayer. I'm very concerned about the impact of 40 cars being in that property, accessing, egressing onto Bishop right across from the Rose Garden, just down from me. I'm already concerned about the amount of traffic that's going to happen before we even talk about this plan. So I know there was a study. This gentleman said there was a study done, a traffic study, but I think it needs to be restudied.
I think he said it didn't meet the numbers to require a traffic study.
I'm sorry?
It did not meet the numbers to require a traffic study.
And that's correct,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Wonder if it will now with all the new development that's happening within the last few months.
Right.
That could change things.
You're right.
I'm going to have to go, but I did get a notification about the meeting in Robertsdale on Thursday. I did get that in the mail. I did not get this one today. I don't understand why some people were left out of this meeting and others were not. But anyway, that I am concerned on both the drainage situation and the traffic impact.
Emily, where do the notice addresses come from? From the Baldwin County Tax.
From the Baldwin County Revenue Office and the tax records.
I did get mine I got the one in Robertsdale from the Revenue Office, from the,
Ours comes certified, so if you got a notice.
I
and you
got
didn't
a
go pick
notice
it
of
up,
the one in
then
Robertsdale, but not this one.
I'll have to look to
We'll
see.
double check.
Anyway, I got to go, but that was all I needed to say.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak to this item? It was not. Right, you need to come up to the microphone if you want. But if it's just for that, I can answer. This traffic study was not done. The traffic studies are required based on the estimated number of ingresses and egresses for a particular development, and this one did not meet that threshold.
I was just going to state that during the school, it's a totally different traffic situation than during the summer.
Understand?
Make a point.
All right, if no one else wishes to speak at this time, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And if you don't mind, we have most of the questions. We had the question about the wall / fence on the back. If you could let us know what your plans are for the back property line. And then the water, dealing with the water flow, the pipe chimney and the piping, or the chimney and the piping.
Yes, but let's see if I'm still technologically savvy enough to go the right direction here. I'm going to start by addressing something you didn't mention, but he did ask, which was the trees. You can kind of see them. There's one right here. There's one right there that are pretty significant. And then there's another one right here. After talking with the landscape architect, he asked if I could pull the grades of the pond off of those trees so that we would not impact them. What you're seeing here is actually a little bit of a fill. We're outside of the critical root zone. We're still within the drip line of them, but we're just doing about a 1-foot fill to create the berm for the pond. So we are trying to be cognizant of the trees. They're actually, those two are on our property, and then there's one that's on his property. And the one that's on his property, we have about 6 inches of fill on our side of the property, creating that berm. So there were 3 trees, and we're trying to salvage all 3 of those. So I wanted to start there because that is something that we were aware of and we wanted to take care of. As far as piping, we have one pipe that leads to the pond in the rear, and that just carries the water from the inner, green space area over to the pond. And then the other pond has ditch lines. Get the mouse awake. We have a ditch line here, we have a ditch line back here, and one going here to this pond. Then everything else is sheet flow.
Question,
Yes.
tell me again, the discharge rate calculated for this development, or for this property post-development, did I understand you to say that it is equal to or less than the discharge rate as the property sits right now?
Yes.
And are you planning on putting a fence on that north side, or just landscaping that area?
I'd have
Which,
to
by the
ask
way,
my
Mr.
client.
We don't have the authority to make them put a wall or a fence. They have to meet the subdivision requirement, the landscape requirements that, are triggered by this multiple occupancy project. But beyond that, it's their choice, so.
Right now, I don't know of any plans to. I can't speak to whether they will or will not be putting a fence up. It's not part of my construction documents, but a lot of times in residential situations, they aren't. But yes, to answer your question, Mr. Dice, we are reducing the rate of runoff to both discharge points, the one that's going to Gayfer and the one that's going to the north. And then also, just to clarify, no, we are not proposing a sand chimney. The sand layer here is about 24 feet deep from what I believe the previous engineer. I did correspond with the previous engineer that worked on the project back in 2009 and asked him about what they were proposing, what he saw, and he said that sand layer was about 24 feet deep, and just knowing your concerns, knowing my concerns, and knowing what ADEM has to say about it, we did not go down that route.
So you just said that you are reducing the rate.
Yes.
Are you also, what about the quantity?
Without the ability to infiltrate, there's no way to reduce the quantity. It will just be drawn out over a longer period of time, and that's why you're seeing.
The quantity will increase.
The quantity will, but that's the reason
Probably not, actually, because that's pretty much 100% grady soil.
Yeah, it's
I
not.
don't think you're getting any infiltration even as
Yeah.
it stands. I don't think you are.
You're not getting a whole lot. There's a little.
I mean, a dummy like me can make a pond out there with a shovel. I mean, that's the worst drainage in all of Fairhope, right
Yeah.
there.
You talking about down on Gayfer at the southeast corner?
I'm saying that whole area.
Yeah, that's
is
a
just-
grady.
That there's no, and I'm just saying that's grady soils.
That's right.
I mean, that whole area, we've had issues through the years with subdivisions there. And I actually had one of those injection wells one time proposed, and ADEM didn't allow it, and then they came back and made a change anyway on I think it was that Magnolias down there.
What about, the fill that the gentleman was describing on his property? Does that have any impact on your strategy?
We would need to look at it, but then if he has been impeding the flow of water from our property onto his, then he would have some issues. And if he's also filling a grady pond, he's got some issues with y'all too, because y'all classify those as wetlands. So at the time of the survey, we have a low point that we are discharging to. If something's changed, we'll definitely have to look into that. We'd have to get onto his property to be able to do that, though, to see what changes have occurred.
I've got one more, because I'm over that way a fairly large amount of time. Either coming down Dyer and out Bishop over to Gayfer. But I'm gonna tell you, that is by far one of the most dangerous traffic areas that there is.
Yeah.
You really can't see up east on Gayfer. And when you come head-to-head with a car on Bishop, trying to get out on Gayfer,
Yeah.
it's a disaster looking for a place
Yeah.
to happen. So I know you'd say you don't need a traffic study, but there seems to be I'm not gonna say a calming device, but maybe a four-way stop at
And-
Bishop.
And I told everybody in the community meeting that I would, I mistakenly said I'd speak to Richard Johnson about it, but I believe that's a county intersection. And
Is that a
so,
county intersection, Richard?
and so,
Well, Richard probably knows the people at the
Yeah.
county, so he could probably help you. You like the way I'm giving you some work, aren't you?
and
But,
It-
but
it-
it would make,
Yeah.
make a lot of
no,
sense, I'm telling you.
I agree. I've got a daughter at the intermediate school, and whenever I have to head out towards Gayfer, I don't enjoy going to that intersection either. So I totally agree, and that's why I told him in the community meeting I'd mention that to Richard. I'll mention it to the county on Thursday when we're there for the counties, because
Right.
this is one of those dual, I've got to get y'all's blessing and theirs. So, but I'll bring that up with the county.
Any more questions? All right, the public
Yeah,
hearing's
Larry,
closed.
is there not any way
Yes.
to get that water to the front of the property, to the south?
We could probably get to the front of the property, but then what we're doing is we're sending it north and going across another private property. So we're now increasing the runoff onto somebody else's property because that's not where it naturally goes. We cannot, in the staff report, there is a conversation about utilizing, there's an existing drainage easement to the east. There's actually a utility easement to the east going to Bishop Road, but Bishop's sitting 2 feet higher than our site. So we can't take it there, but we could probably get it to Gayfer. But if we get it to Gayfer, then we're going to go under that 18-inch culvert that they're referring to that already has issues. And so we're probably going to overtop Gayfer. We'll have to probably better define that ditch, but then eventually it turns and heads north across private property, which would be increasing the impacts on those people.
Ken, do you have some comments?
Somewhat to Robert's point, I just wanted to make the commission aware that under the regulations, technically, if there's drainage in a public right-of-way, the developer is required to connect to that. Now, it sounds like that may be a problem too, given the nature of the facilities in the right-of-way, but under the regulations, that's technically the requirement.
I don't understand. I mean, I understand the regulation, but in this case, are you saying that he would need to connect to the,
Absent the commission approving a deviation or a waiver of that regulation, yes.
so as it's drawn, then you're saying it's not conforming to our current
Yes, sir.
requirements?
I would
Wait.
disagree with.
I missed all of that. Now, speak a little louder for us, Douglas.
Under the regulations, if a developer has drainage facilities that are part of his development, and there is available drainage facilities in a public right-of-way, such as Gayfer, he's required to take his drainage in those facilities he builds out to the drainage in the public right-of-way.
Even if the natural drainage is elsewhere?
If he collects it and has facilities that he uses for stormwater drainage, yes, sir.
How do you make it flow uphill if you got a low area in the
That's
back?
the key words, available.
Yeah, yeah. What does that mean?
I mean, I
I
understand
think-
what you're
You know, I
saying,
think
but if
what-
it's not practical,
I th-
practical meaning impossible.
Art, I'm thinking, and I hate to punt everything down the field, but, you know, Buford's recommendation was that we table this for further study. I'm kind of thinking maybe we need to let the engineer get together with the city staff and give Ken a little bit more time to look at that and bring it back up. Next month's meeting is less than 30 days, so we're clear. If somebody wants to make a motion to table this to the next meeting, we can certainly do that.
I have one comment before we do, and then I will make that motion. Just as, you know, as we get more and more developed, as we deal more and more with difficult areas where there already is, are stormwater issues, you know, we can't, there is a way to control the rate, and if you collect it and reuse it. If you have a cistern, use it for irrigation, use it to flush toilets. So I'm not necessarily recommending we enforce this on these people, but I think it's something we need to consider.
we need to look at putting that in our rules if we're going to do that, and that
Yeah.
may be a good idea in some of these places. And, this is going to be tricky because, if we then, follow what Ken's suggesting, and we've already got a place where the water's going over the road in the culvert, and then we dump more in that's not there, then, we're making John happy, but dumping on David,
Yeah.
So,
And-
but I think we probably need to go ahead and take a deep breath, and then in 30 days, review this, which was Buford's recommendation to start with, since
And-
we've already had. But Richard, do you have something to add?
Well, while Richard's coming up here, it's just hard for me to believe that whatever the size of this property is creating all the drainage problems in that area. And I don't know that anybody should be punished for a problem that persisted well before that they tried to do what they could do with their property. I mean, I don't understand that at all.
Richard, if you remember when you and I had the discussion about the treated effluent in the city and the way the experiment station property is over off of County 13.
Right?
And all of that is pasture land because of the topography associated with it. But all of the drainage that feeds to there from west of Bishop Road, the property, gentleman's property just to the north is part of that same, I call it a hollow. It's not a drainage area. There's no, it doesn't appear to be any wetlands on your property, is that correct? And there's not any at all on the experiment station, but that's where all of the accumulation is. Now, the two subdivisions that we're talking about at the end, what was the name of those? Huh? Rolling Oaks or whatever it is, that thing's got it's got a big portion of that same gully. A lot of water accumulates in there, but whoever built the road, they didn't do a very good job because knowing what was coming. And with those pictures that you looked at just a few minutes ago, yeah, we've got a lot of that in the county and probably in this city, but at the same time, whose responsibility is it now to make that a little more tolerable?
Well, yeah, and I think it's a public-private kind of thing. I think the property owners have to be able to at least have easements and things that allow the water to go where it needs to go, if that's the case. And I don't have a problem with Sam Chimney, the chimney features. And I think recharge is going to have to be something we're going to have to consider one day. But I realize ADM's got an issue with it right now, but I don't know that means it's the wrong thing to do. But, and then as Holly was saying, I'm sorry, not Rebecca, I mean, yeah, using it for irrigation and rain barrels and those kind of things, I think those are the kind of things that can help. But, I mean, to stop everything that we're doing just because of a problem that's existing already, that's not going to solve the problem.
Well, we're not denying.
The problem's still going to be there.
I mean, we're not voting it down. I mean, we're
I know,
basically
I'm
saying,
just, I know
if we've
that.
got a regulation, we need to, I think, enforce it and change it.
What regulation, is that zoning regulation or is that?
It's in the
Set-
next, it's in EC, we've all been talking about, 3B, I think, Article 5, it's in the next provision. It says site facilities that the developer has on the property to deal with stormwater drainage. If there's public drainage in a public right-of-way that they can get to, it's required to go that way.
And then if we're not going to
I'm not
enforce,
saying that helps here,
if,
but
if,
you've
if,
heard what-
if we're not going to enforce that, I think we need to say.
We need to
because
change,
of-
we
because
need
of-
to change the verbiage
We
then,
need
or
to
add
change the
something
verbiage,
to
or
it
if we're
to
not
make
going
that.
to enforce it, we need to, at least when we make the motion to approve it, if that's what the commission, wants to do, I think in that motion to approve, the person should say, even though, we're not requiring the water to go, as the regulation would appear, because we think that it's better in the public health and safety to not overflow Bishop Road worse than it's already been flowed. And we probably need to have a little stipend or a little statement in the motion as to why we did not follow our regulation, that we didn't follow it because Bishop Road's already overflowing and this is gonna cause it to overflow more. So we're gonna allow the water to go where it's always been going. I think we should at least do that.
And I would like to contribute, since I'm kind of the instigator of where we're at today. One of my responsibilities is to review the drainage, and there's no doubt that the design that the engineer is in control of is very compliant. LID techniques are very compliant. There's no doubt, looking at the design and the calculations support design, that they have met the requirement that the post-development discharge rate is not going to be higher than the pre-development for the design storm events. The challenge that we have here today is, unfortunately, as you've already heard, I spent some time on this case 10 years ago, and another engineer tried multiple solutions to the same problem and couldn't solve the problem. And my concern is we can come back a month later and the answer is going to be the same. When we say available, yes, I would say that portion of the land that naturally flows to Gayfer is being collected and flowed to Gayfer as it is available. Unfortunately, this property has a high point ridge in it that divides it from north to south, and the north does generally flow that direction. The challenge here is there's not a defined draw or drainage way or anything that you can point to on the topography or on the map that says water has clearly flowed through this draw or drainage way. There's prescriptive rights to it or whatever. There is a depressed area on the adjacent property immediately to the west that what we think is generally that water goes there, it fills up, and then flows out of there during rain events that exceeds the capacity of that low area to hold it. The concern that I expressed was, again, we have a discharge point that, even though the engineer has done everything to mitigate that, meaning that it's not concentrated, it is spread out, it is done very well, the design contemplates that, it still is traveling in a direction that there is not a clear prescriptive right to. That's the concern. Do we have that case? Have we approved things in the past? Yes, but as your staff, we should at least make you aware of that concern, and that's where we got to. And there's no doubt that Larry has spent a lot of time trying to come up with a solution to this problem, but he has convinced me, and I've convinced myself after 10 years of looking at this piece of property, there's not a solution to this problem, but to mitigate it as best as possible on the site that they have to develop. And I feel they've done everything in their power to mitigate it, but there is going to be water that flows to the north that in possibly in a path that has not flowed that way in the past. That is the concern, and there's not a solution. The easement to the east will not work. It's buck and grade. Putting it all to Gayfer may create worse problems than for that portion that naturally flows north to continue to flow that way. For Rolling Oaks, the problem is it's all going to end up in the same place anyway, no matter which path it takes. So that problem is pre-existing, and even the gentleman stated that he feels that 85% of it's from Auburn land. Well, if it's 2 feet deep and 85% of it's from something that has nothing to do with this development, it's still flooding. So I just want to leave that with you. I don't know if we can come back in 30 days and have a solution to this problem other than what we have before you today, which is as compliant as that this developer can control. The part is he can't control what's occurring off his site, and we always want to be cognizant and considerate of other private property. If that was a right-of-way on the north side, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because that's what the right-of-way is for, is to accept drainage as well. And that's all I just want to share.
So you feel comfortable with it as it's drawn as the impartial city engineer, and you don't see any reason that we need to put it off for another 30 days?
I just don't think we can come back to any other alternative than where we're at.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just my, that's the consideration. If I was Ford and had a better idea, I'd throw it out there. I don't have a better idea. I think Larry has spent a lot of time on this. I know another engineer that I respect spent a lot of time, came up with a solution only to have a state regulatory agency say, no, you can't do that. So that's kind of where we are. Thank you.
Richard. So Ken, you're comfortable if somebody wanted to make a motion to approve this MOP, if they stated in that approval allowing the water to go as drawn, due to the fact that if all the water's brought out to Gayfer, it might cause more of a traffic hazard than it's there currently.
Exacerbate an already existing and known problem. I think that's a defendable position for the commission to take.
Okay. Commission, you've heard everything, so it's up to y'all. make a motion to approve, to deny, or to postpone a month. According to Richard, it doesn't look like postponing will necessarily achieve anything.
Larry, what happens Thursday night? You mentioned that the county commission or the county planning commission, what is their?
It's recommended for approval. It's the planning commission for the county. This being in y'all's ETJ, we still have a master site plan approval for them, and it's recommended for approval by the county.
And with the same drainage issues on the table with them?
Yeah, we gave them the same report, and they're fine with everything. They didn't have any comments. So they might ask some more questions when they hear from the public, like y'all did. But yeah, no, there's no other issues.
Thank you, Larry. East side, west side, anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. I would move in regard to case SD 19.40 Tin Tops at Gafer that we approve the multiple occupancy project subject to staff's recommendation, and also that although our regs stipulate that water needs to go to a public drainage way if it's available. First of all, I'd like to say that we need to change that because it doesn't, that's not appropriate. And then secondly, that this is one of those situations where it appears they've done everything they can do, and I would move that we approve it.
I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Further discussion.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject before the commission acts?
Certainly, of course.
What I would redirect the commission's attention to, what is on the screens before you, is note that the conditions of approval that we put together in the event that it was the pleasure of this commission to approve. Note item 1 is requiring a drainage easement. And also, commissioners, if you note item 2B, that is asking the commission to, as a condition of approval, require the landscape buffer around the entire property. So, Chairman, Commissioners, certainly we respect the decision of this commission, but before you act, you may wish to modify condition 1 and condition 2B. 2B is in Bravo, before you act.
Holly, would you unsecond my motion?
I'll unsecond your motion.
I will unmotion my motion, and I would like to now remotion my motion. Approve Tin Tops at Gafer and multiple occupancy project, and exclude from it, number 1, that there be a drainage easement, that would be excluded. And that not be required to put a buffer completely around this project at this time.
Do I have a second?
What, we didn't even discuss that, though. We don't want to, we don't think they need a buffer? I'm going out of order, I'm sorry.
That going further.
Holly, did you second that already, or did we have discussion?
I haven't seconded.
Okay.
I can just vote. I just don't like it.
You want to make a second, and I'll ask for further discussion.
Are you going to add back in the drainage not go into the public right of way?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Forgot about it.
Okay, but you're saying that you do not think that the buffer needs to go?
Not around the entire property. Most of it's in the county anyway.
Just so we can be clear, the.
Turn your mic on.
Sorry. I don't think Buford's recommendation changed, but he was just pointing that out if you wanted to pull that. So you can leave 1 and 2 in unless you so
Yeah,
see a
I'm
reason.
just wondering
Well, I could,
why
but I
we're
don't
throwing
like-
out all the
I
recommendations of
could,
staff.
but I don't like recommendation 1 where he's got to get a drainage easement.
Gotcha.
They've done everything that they, it appears, according to Mr. Johnson, that they've done everything it appears that they can do, and
Okay.
nothing else
Just
that we
want to be
can
clear
do.
that that wasn't
Correct. And commissioners
Changing the
too.
recommendation.
And Hunter, I appreciate that because I need to add one more clarification, commissioners. I promise this is it. Item 2B, let me explain this one more time, just a bit further. The way, my reading of the landscape ordinance is that a multifamily development of this type is adjacent to residentially zoned property to its immediate east. My reading of the landscape ordinance is that does require a landscape buffer just for that area. My request to the Planning Commission is to then apply that around the entire perimeter, and I've listed the PPINs of the property that are affected. So take that into consideration, commissioners, if it is the pleasure of the commission to modify that condition of approval.
All right, let me make a point to you on that exact thing. You're asking us to approve a buffer all the way around the property, but our ordinance does not stipulate that that is required.
Yes, sir.
So, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm not one that thinks we ought to do for one that we ain't willing to do for everybody. So the point is, either change the regulations or abide by the regulations as they are.
Duly noted.
Well, but we're proposing that we haven't changed the regulations requiring us to go to a right-of-way, and we're just going to,
You can't physically do that. Water doesn't run uphill. I mean, you can't do it. And I don't know, I guess you could put a pump in there and pump it all up to the right of way. But I mean, that's an error that needs to be corrected. I don't know how to correct that. In this situation, that's just one of those impossibilities.
Well,
But
you
it's
could-
not
you could
as it
put-
relates to the
You could put a
landscape.
pump, you could easily put a pump and drain
Do
it
it
out
all
to
over the
Gayfer, but the
place.
problem is when you put a pump and drain it to Gayfer, you're gonna overflow.
You're gonna overflow
Bishop
Gayfer.
Road works.
Y'all's
Worse
regulations don't
situation.
allow a pump.
Yeah.
Y'all's regulations don't allow
Oh, don't
pumping
mess up my story
stormwater.
with the facts. Come on, Larry. I was on a roll, man. Daggum engineers.
Okay. So do we have did I make a motion?
He's made read the motion back, please, if you will.
We have a motion to approve with conditions of staff recommendation of 3 and 4 only. And to allow the drainage to not be forced to go to the public right-of-way due to adverse effects that it will cause.
That sounds good. Do I have a
And the
second?
landscape buffer to be only on what's
Well, that's
designed by on the
under-
east side.
That's understood by not.
That's where it's
requiring
required.
B, 2B. So are you willing to second that?
I will second that.
Do I have any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously.
Now, excuse me,
I
excuse me.
didn't say aye, I was gonna abstain.
Oh,
Can I
excuse
do
me.
that?
Any abstentions?
Me,
Okay.
yes.
One abstention.
Let's talk just for a second, real quick about this. There seems to be two items right there that a regulation stipulates something that in one case is impossible with which we should adhere.
Yeah. It's not impossible.
I don't, from the natural
flow.
swing of things, it's okay, maybe it's not impossible. Excuse
I
me.
think we
It's
need
not
to come up
impossible.
with
It
more
needs- The verbiage
solutions.
needs to be changed to accommodate it.
We need to
There
come
are
up with
two
more
issues right
solutions
there.
in our parameters to come up with alternative methods.
Yeah,
Right.
especially, I mean, as we get to these areas where there's already a problem. And so we're not making the rate any worse, but we are adding to the quantity. We've got to have more options.
Well, when you add to the yes, and in cases where you add to the quantity, you're actually making the rate worse because you've got, that same amount going over more time, and eventually it backs up. I mean, there's some cases where, it'd be neat to do just an overall, drainage study where some of these subdivisions, we might want to have zero water retention. We might just want that water to be piped straight, the closer you get to the rivers or the bays, you want that water piped straight to get the
Well,
heck out of the way before
and there
everything
may-
else hits
And there
and
may be
backs
some
up.
areas where you want zero
And then
to leave
the
the
further
site.
you are,
We
and
want
maybe some
all the
properties don't
drainage.
necessarily always need to be developed. I mean, there's some properties that,
That's the other
if it
thing.
creates enough of a nightmare, maybe you just, can't
Well,
do
if there's
everything.
water going off the property without any construction having taken place, and water going off the property after construction takes place, depending on the timeline of how fast it goes off, it shouldn't add anything to the issues further downstream. But that'd be, well, looking at those pictures, that's gonna be real hard.
If more water is coming off, it will, because you've got the same rate,
Quantity
you've got the
matters.
same rate for longer. So toward the tail end of that rate, if you've got more water coming off, then it's jamming it up worse.
There's a cumulative effect.
See what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
if you have 50 subdivisions that are holding water back for 2 hours, and then all of a sudden, all that water that's been held back for 2 hours, that used to be gone in an hour hits, then, that's your peak surge. So it's just, it's just longer and
Well,
more
and
towards the tail
that's
end.
part of the study that was done or attempted to be done for a number of the different rivers and creeks in Bonner
Right.
County.
It'd be great to get
Let
that.
some of them close in, release real quick.
Like-
The ones upstream, release over a slower period of time.
Exactly, like that location out there on Red Barn Road that had the, 10-acre lots. That didn't really matter because the lots were so big, you weren't talking about really any water with one house per 5 or 10 acres anyway. But had that been a dense subdivision, that would have been one you'd want to just have that water get to the river as fast as possible and then be gone
Yeah.
And
before the
there's
rest of the
some-
water catches up.
There's some limits, and at some point you do have to look at infiltration. I mean, the more pavement you add, the more impervious surfaces you add, there are limits to how much our waterways can accept. Sorry, Larry.
No, y'all are fine. I came back
Bigger
up because I just
discussion.
wanted, as y'all are talking about this and you're looking at the regulation and trying to figure out the best solution. And one thing to keep in mind is if we were to abide by that and we were trying to send everything to the right-of-way, we're still designing under the same other thresholds that say we can't increase the runoff to that point. And so the only way that we could do that is to totally detain everything on site and reduce it to a rate equal to what's currently going there, which doesn't include the majority of this site. And so what that does is it makes these ponds swell up. And then the other issue, like I said before, it's not like I can take the runoff that used to be going over here and add that quantity, that rate, and now add it over here. I've got to still trickle it out at the same rate. And so even if, and I'm not 100% sure, Mr. Brown asked the question, I said, I think that one's possible. I know for sure Bishop's not. I didn't even, go back and study Gayfer because I knew of all the other constraints that were going to cause issues, but I knew Bishop wasn't an option. And there's a possibility that you could get it there, but then you're going to exasperate that situation. We'd have to detain it even more because we can't increase the runoff that's going to that point, because that eventually goes across private property too. It doesn't stay in the city's right of way. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Larry.
Hey, thank y'all, I won't be rude, but I got 2 grandkids playing basketball. I'm riding right now, one of them kids.
See you later. All right. Item number 3 on the agenda.
Please give me just a second. We've got to pull some files up. And if, Joe, you can hear me in the back, I'd like to swap the screen over. PowerPoint's still showing. Do y'all know how to?
Yeah, this is a short agenda too.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm going to hand just a quick summary of some zoning amendment changes. I'll go over each of these in detail, but just a quick summary of what we're proposing. Get back on my mic.
Dragged it onto your screen. There you go.
Let
Has
Joe.
to read off your hard copy, apparently.
Okay. We'll get there. Evening, Commissioners. We've got, for the most part, we're just kind of cleaning up some of our zoning amendments. What we've noticed recently, there's some language in our code that hasn't been edited in quite some time. And there were some memos on file from previous administrations that kind of clarified what that is, but that creates a problem, both for the applicants and us. There's inconsistencies. If we don't have a copy of that memo, we don't know what's happening. That stems, the majority of these amendments stem from those cases, except for the PUD, and I want to touch on that. We can talk about it tonight. I will recommend approving these. The commission can choose what happens from there, but I would ask that we don't even consider the PUD this month and carry that over. There's some vetting of a couple of items on there, maybe adding another depending on how this conversation goes. So with that said, we'll just kind of jump into these. Article 2, Section A3, the Director of Planning and Building is currently the definition. And let's see if I can zoom in. I think that stems from quite some time ago. We haven't issued permits in our department in a long time. So it's just clarifying who's responsible for that. And we're going to change that definition throughout the ordinance. Let's see if we can.
You probably don't need to scroll through that, because I couldn't read that with a mighty.
I know, that's I'll kind of read basically some of the just changes. I'll put it on the minutes. We're changing the Director of Planning and Building to the Director of Planning, and we're also adding that is the definition of that is the person responsible for the zoning ordinance or their representation. So our staff can provide that role as well. We will make that change throughout the ordinance. Jumping to Article 3, Section C1, dimensions.
Any questions or concerns
yeah.
on that one? Let's just one by one. Everybody's cool
That's
with that?
great.
Okay, so we can make a motion on that later, all right?
Hey, and if I can just say that if you do look what was included in your packet, it will show you
It was highlighted.
where it's highlighted, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So Article 3, Section C2, in dimension standards, we have a few changes there. In the table, dimension table for maximum lot coverage, the maximum lot coverage at the top of that was the principal structure is the way that read.
Yeah.
That was not, I don't think that was ever the intent. It was before the table was including in the zoning code, it said all structures. And then there was a memo to support, this is what we really meant when we changed that. So just to make that clear, it's kind of unfair for people to come in with their applications and then we say, well, they've already done the work, and then we say, well, that's not what we meant. So just to clarify that. And the footnote beneath that table, Section B, there was, the intent is if you have a driveway on the side of your house, then your side setback should be 15 feet, where otherwise it may be 10 feet. So an extra 5 feet. I think the intent there is to still provide that 3-foot buffer along the sides. That was just some bad language, the way it was, so we clarified that language. Basically, if the driveway extends past the front of the house or structure, then you're going to require a 15-foot setback on that side.
All right. Is that all for the dimension standards?
We have one more in the table 3.3, residential accessory structures. We added another column there that will, basically in all situations, it requires a minimum of 5 foot between structures.
Is that just if you have two accessory structures?
Yes,
Okay.
that's in between other accessory structures. So if you have a pool house and a garage, they need to be at least 5 foot apart.
Okay.
So that was all for the
Any
dimensions.
concerns or questions about dimension standards? No? Okay.
Okay.
Fencing.
The fencing, Article 4, Section B5, we just added wall to clarify what that means. So wall is treated just like a fence. If it's in the front foot, height limits and those things. So
Any concerns, questions? Need for more clarity on that? We're okay with that one? Okay.
okay, and I'm
then
going to
we're
skip over
skip
P.
5.
I'm going to skip over that so we can kind of talk about that one a little more and just go to the non-conforming real quick. The non-conforming structures, we have, and I've watched, we went back and researched the amendments to the zoning ordinance through time, and it's kind of this evolution. I don't think and a lot of times you see you can extend a nonconformity, but that's typically through time is the definition that can, if you have a nonconformity, you can still have a nonconformity in the future. We're not going to make you tear that down. At some point, the definition or the interpretation of that was you can extend that nonconformity all the way back and, forwards through, so your setback basically changes. If you have a 5-foot stoop extending in the side setback to 2 feet of the property, now your setback on that side's 2 foot. I don't think that's ever the intent. So the language we put in here was that nonconformities may not be extended either horizontally or vertically. But we made sure that but they can stay, but any additions shall meet current conditions in the zoning ordinance.
I have a question about that. So if if you were in a house that was built too close to the street, it's closer than the allowable setback on the street side. This sounds like you couldn't add on to the back. And I had always interpreted that to mean you can't make that worse. You couldn't add on closer to the street, but you wouldn't be constrained if you wanted to add on in the other direction.
We can look at the intent is only in the setback where it's non-conforming. So if you still have room in the rear, you can still add to the rear.
Okay.
Does that make
within the
sense,
buildable
Ken?
area.
It says alterations and expansions shall conform to all current regulations.
That's what it says non-conforming.
Her example, I would have said, well, the setback on the backside is whatever. We're not concerned with what the setback on the front side is. We're concerned about what it is on the back. If they have room to expand it, that would be.
Okay, I wasn't clear when it says non-conforming structures or those parts that are non-conforming may not be expanded. That's a little
kind of those.
confusing. Maybe it is.
You can, in some cases, you can actually have a garage that maybe the entirety is non-conforming.
Yeah.
So that, or a portion of the building that is a non-conforming, if it's a stoop in the front setback or, a wing of the house that's in the side setback, it's those portions that are non-conforming. And so if you could go in and put a second story on one single-story house, but except for that portion that's in a non-conforming.
Okay, well, it may be clearer than I thought it was.
It's still,
It's a little fuzzy.
it's still confusing because think about it now, let's think about down the road. All these people are sitting up here and all of y'all may not be here. And somebody trying to interpret this, not gonna be have sat in this meeting and understood what you just said. So.
It could just be adding more sentences.
The non-conforming structure, let's just read it like that, the non-conforming structure may not be expanded either horizontally or vertically. It doesn't say anything about in the area of the non-conforming,
Yeah, it may
in
just
the
mean,
non-conforming area. You see what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
talking about, and I agree with Rebecca, it talks about the entire structure. You gotta address it to what you're intending is that you can't expand into the non-conforming area any further.
So
make a
what if
nonconformance
you
worse.
added a little bit to that first sentence saying, in such a way that the non-confirmation is increased? Something to that
Yeah,
extent.
something.
In other words, at the end of that sentence, put something to the extent of, what do you think, Ken? In such a way that the, non-conforming structures or those parts of the structure that are non-conforming may not be expanded either horizontally or vertically in such a way that the non-conforming aspect is expanded.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about it. It says non-conforming structures or those parts of a structure that are non-conforming. Well, either.
You got to cover two
So
scenarios.
maybe you take out the part
Yeah,
about
just
the
break it.
non-conforming structure. You got an or. You got an or here. Either your non-conforming structure, well, this whole building right here
Well,
is
that's
a
true.
structure.
If you take out the first
Take
three
the
words and
first
just
three
start
words
with
out of it, maybe
any
you got
part
it.
of a structure that, instead of those, any part of a structure that is non-conforming.
Those parts
Structures that are non-conforming may not be expanded either horizontally or vertically.
Those parts of a structure that are non-conforming may not be expanded either horizontally or vertically. How does that work, Ken?
And then, especially when you follow it up with alterations or expansions shall conform to all current regulations, you should be covered.
You're gonna.
When that's the section
You
we're
didn't want
in.
us to vote on this tonight anyway, did you?
I did on this one.
Oh, you did?
Okay.
Yeah. We've got
I
some
think
issues on this
especially with
one.
all the discussion around, non-conforming structures on Greeno, we need to get it really precise.
Let's look at it.
Why don't we do this? Why don't
We can take recommendations.
why don't we, somebody make a recommendation in that case to make a recommendation to city council to approve the changes as presented in Article 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll bring 5 and 7 back at the next meeting.
That sounds
How's
great.
that
Sounds
Do you want to go over the PUD a little bit? Give me some feedback, or we'll go through it pretty quick. Did anybody have a chance to read that? Any questions on that, or am I in the right direction? There's a couple of things I'm trying to solve here with the PUDs. One, we've got PUDs that are 15 years old and never been built, and they're, there's no expiration on those. That's kind of an anomaly.
It's in the middle.
But from a staff perspective, the way we've kind of tied PUDs together and the amendments that go with them, it's to answer a simple question takes a long time, because we have to look through every amendment as an independent case and look at what happened there. So it's a week's worth of research to answer one simple question. In PUDs, and we kind of put it on the applicant, it's not much different than what they're doing now, but right now we require a site plan as a part of a PUD. A master development plan, and they're a master plan, whatever you want to call it, is a document the applicants were responsible for. When they come back for an amendment, the way this gets codified in an ordinance, they actually amend that master development plan. So there's a governing document at all points in time that we can see quickly what that PUD allows. Public can, it's a public document. So that's what we're trying to do with this amendment is, and kind of clarifying, because also with a PUD, it's kind of moved, there's places in one part of our ordinance and another, and just having a clear list for applicants. Here's what we're going to expect for those applications. And it does move some conversations, depending on the project. Every PD is a little unique, so we can at least put this information up there, and then if we don't need that for a project, we can work on that with the applicants, instead of trying to fight for more information to make it clear. It's clear what we're asking for with the PUD.
I have a question, real quick thought. When we are presented a master plan and then things are approved, and then I drive out and see that the master plan has not been, what's actually developed is not what we approved, does that mean that there was some kind of change that was not presented to us because it was a less of an impact, or they made a structure change that didn't need to be brought back to us, or how does that work?
There is is it substantial conformity? Is that the there are parts of the PUD that can be approved administratively. And that kind of gets, what does that mean? Substantial conformity. It's hard to put a barrier on that. So I would.
Well, so like the building height, if the building height and the number of windows didn't change, but they could totally change the style if that's not one of the criteria that's being.
That's right.
Reviewed, because I've asked that question.
Well, and it's what you put in. What gets approved in the PUD, and if the only
Well, it
thing
has
we're
to be
going to
building
require is a
elevations.
site plan, we can, there's so many things you can do, and it's just a matter of each project I think you have to look
And Hunter, I'll
at.
tell you one thing that would be nice to clarify in this, because I totally agree with Holly here, is a lot of times we'll look at a PUD and they'll have nice glossy pictures and diagrams.
Walking paths.
And the prior administration didn't consider those as part of the PUD. they just considered the narrative as part of the PUD.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically you were just talking about setbacks, densities, height requirements, and so the finished product could be Meravision flip-flop, the density, be put in the front where you don't, in the back where you don't want it, so the front where you do, and so some things that, I would consider a substantial change, it actually meets the letter of the PUD law if you throw those diagrams out that they, showed us.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably need to clarify, whether or not the initial site plan reviews, that they have prior to coming back for the subdivisions inside,
Mm-hmm. And
match
that's,
whether we, put that in there.
yeah, and it's a little bit of a step, we've got to take the first step. So this could be the first step, but we can clarify what substantial conformity is. From dimensions, maybe staff has a 5% leeway, so they can kind of move some buildings around or roads or
Sure.
things like that. We can,
And I think on that sunset clause, my suggestion would be if they come to the P and Z, have it be a year. We approve it for a year, and I'd probably leave that entire second paragraph out.
okay.
And just let them come back. I mean, whatever everybody else thinks of, but I don't see, requiring any limit to how many times they come. If it's a good PUD, it's a good PUD, and there's no reason, I mean, if we shouldn't, if we don't want to extend it for a year, maybe we shouldn't have approved it to start with. I mean, if things change substantially and it doesn't meet, current regulations, then at that point, we've got a reason to not extend it. But I'm saying if there are no reasons not to extend it.
And Ken, kind of, that's a thought. So with a PUD, we have some subjectivity there. We can debate things that maybe don't meet a checklist, but how does buildings look, things like that. Without a definition there on what the end time is, 2 years, 4 years, whatever that is, I don't know if you can deny the extension if it's, on what grounds can you deny that extension? Just because we've kind of changed direction on the way we're
You probably have to say,
comprehensive plan or?
do the comprehensive plan or subdivision regulations, making substantial changes in the direction the city's going forward since the PUD was approved.
How many times did you say you thought you ought to be able to extend it?
Indefinitely, if there's no reason not to.
I don't agree
I mean,
with that.
I'm not real, I mean, that's not.
I know, I just,
I'm just kind of throwing
we
that out.
we did all kinds of them in the county back prior to the major fallout in 2008 and 9. I mean, they were some of the most massive PUDs you've ever seen in your life. Sweetwater down in Magnolia Springs comes to mind. There were 2 or 3 up on Highway 31. And they were incredible. Well, then things tanked, and after they tanked, then there was so much stuff that had changed. But we gave them a year. They had a year to get it started, and if they didn't get it started in a year, they had a year to get it started. They got one extension, one-year extension.
Absolutely.
And then otherwise, because what ultimately happens is you've got a lot of technology that changes over the course of whatever period. And if you're gonna if they're still gonna rock along 5 or 6 years later under the same approval from 6 years prior to, no, I don't think so.
That's a good point. I changed my mind.
I agree, and that the whole sunset clause is something I've been talking about for years because our growth and how rapid it is, if we've been in situations where things were approved 10 years ago and now they're accepted in our, our infrastructure or our traffic or our water runoff, all the impacts were not what they were 10 years ago, and now we're in trouble because it was approved. So we definitely need to, there's too much rapid development that we need to make sure that we have a little more control of how quickly it's done so that it fits that right designation and all the effects that are happening to that area.
The other part of it that you were asking about in terms of what's a major change that would come back to us, or a minor, a minor staff change that could be made by staff. It was the same deal there. If you don't trust your staff to do what they need to do, then you don't need them to start off with. But I would assume that there's no way you can identify every item that's gonna be required or that would be allowed for staff to make the change as opposed to coming back to us. Then what ends up happening is we get mired down in all of the minutia associated with a project when we really ought to not, because they're gonna err on the side of, well, give it to the planning commission and let them look at it. I don't wanna look at it. I want you, you're the expert. I want you, unless it's something major, I want you, that's my opinion.
Well, and that also is mitigated somewhat by requiring a little more on the front end. So what you do review as part of the PUD will give us some direction on how we make decisions in the future on that PUD.
That's right.
Well, and Art's totally right, and a lot of these issues are, you know, when you get feet on the ground and you see where the ingress egress is there's a 200-year-old oak tree there.
Yeah.
Do you want to come back to the P and Z to say, do we want to bulldoze the oak tree or move the ingress egress over 30 feet? You know, it's a no-brainer. And those are the type of things that, you know, staff needs to have the authority to do.
Since you require building, and I'm usually the one advocating against this, but since you require building elevations, one thing that usually just happens with those reviews is when we talk about what if this changed, what if that changed, when I'm in, you know, have a different hat on, come in as an architect, is number of windows. You know, like what if the developer changes something after we show you the site plan, and the thing that would make a big difference architecturally is what if 50% of the windows were gone?
Right.
So there might be some threshold of 20%, 10%, you know, instead of just the construction materials, but the amount of fenestration.
And we can do things multiple ways. The mechanism I'm more familiar with in kind of getting that is to have some form-based codes that I think we're looking at in another project that you can refer back to.
Yeah.
That kind of provide some guidance on transparency issues and those things. So I think that's just kind of starting to layer some of these tools. I think will help us in the future.
All right. So do you want us now to make a motion we haven't done for Articles 2, 3, and 4? Motion to recommend to City Council? Is that what we need?
Is that what you're looking for, or are you looking for all of it?
I think that would work great, and because it's not in there, we noticed the planning director and the planning and building director was other places in the code too. So we need to go through the whole ordinance, so a footnote that will allow us to do that as well.
Yeah.
That would be.
Okay, well, I'll move that we accept Articles 2, 3, and 4 with, can we add in that language with the stipulation that the planning director gets corrected throughout the ordinance?
That would be perfect.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. And we have an informal review for Dominion Partners LLC.
That
They
informal,
have withdrawn.
John, all right,
So
moving
we're gonna
along.
skip on to-
Do you have an update on our progress with the Greeno
Wait,
Road Corridor
wait,
Overlay
wait,
District?
give me just half a second. That one was, Dominion was withdrawn? Okay, I want, for y'all's benefit, I want to go back just one more time. We had this discussion at a previous planning commission meeting whereby the engineer of record came to us and said, all this stuff that was going on Highway 104, the highway department says it'll be taken care of, all the traffic will be taken care of when Highway 181 is 4-lane. And the point is, go to Highway 64, where the 4 lanes already by it, any morning between 7 and 8:30, or in the afternoon between 3:30 and about 6 o'clock, dare you to get through that intersection. My point is, if they come back with that again, anything on 104, and they come and they say, oh, a traffic study's not warranted, I will be a Nikita Khrushchev and take my shoe off and beat the thing.
Tell us how you really feel, Art. I hate when you mince
guarantee
words,
it.
buddy.
I mean, because you look at what's going on 104 right now, with the high school out there, you got the Circle Church, they got 4 deputies there now, having to let traffic in and out, and that's on a Sunday. That's on a Sunday to let traffic in and out. You put the subdivisions and you start putting these kinds of developments on a 2-lane road, in addition to everything else that's there. County 13, prime example, County 13 at 64, I guess that's Whitespunder doing those apartments, or somebody is there. Oh, my goodness. I wouldn't want to live in that vicinity for anything, because they made no changes to 64 or 13, right there where that massive apartment complex is being built. Anyway.
What's the regulation for warranty and traffic?
So Commissioners, and I'll answer the Commissioner's question, and forgive me for interjecting, Commissioners, but you'll notice IR 19.08, it says 252-unit apartment complex. That would absolutely trigger a traffic study. That would absolutely trigger a traffic study. So it's basically 1,000 trips or 50 trips peak. And again, we rely on the engineer of record to interpret that requirement. But a low-density development, a small number of lots is not going to trigger it, but a 250-unit apartment complex absolutely will.
But Buford, you've got to take into consideration the cumulative effect of all of these 50 or 100 lot subdivisions that are getting dumped in one specific area. Eventually, the summation of all of those has got to cause some kind of a major problem. And for each and every one of them to keep coming to us and saying, oh, well, they say, we don't have to do a traffic study. Right, then you end up with County 64.
Down by 1,000.
Yeah, Commissioners, you are preaching to the choir.
Well, that's another one we need to change.
What's the threshold for traffic studies?
Yeah, 1,000 trips per day and 50 trips per hour
Y'all can
peak.
check and see what some of the other municipalities and areas do, what their requirements are on that, for the next meeting. And
Look at the county regs also. I mean, they're same program.
yeah.
Well, it's similar to what we were talking about with stormwater. If you already have like a peak flow and a problematic flow happening, are we to allow people to just continue to dump into it?
Because if you look at Gayfer, like they were saying, if you look at the amount of traffic that's already on Gayfer, and then you're gonna put these, say, 20 places on there, if they're only looking at that 20, then yeah, there's no traffic for that 20. But if you look at the entire stretch of Gayfer, that's more than 200. That's more than 1,000 trips.
About 1,000 scratches. 20 times 10 is 200 right there. Do the math.
I hate to keep beating this dead horse, but it's not dead yet. Ideally, there's going to have to come a time when the municipalities and the counties get ahead of the curve in infrastructure instead of trying to play catch up. And until we do, yeah, that's right. It all takes money. Well, I'm sorry, but then perhaps, and I've never talked to Robert about this, but I tell you, the only way that's going to really be able for a municipality to deal with it, schools, sewage, water, and traffic, is going to be in significant impact fees. And I mean significant impact fees to those that, they're going to pass them on anyway. But right now, all of us taxpayers are doing nothing but subsidizing the developer. So.
All right, moving
I'll
along.
think of something else in a minute.
Moving along. Number 4, Green Road overlay.
Real quick, at the next council meeting, we will propose an extension of the moratorium. Hate to do that, but shockingly, there's not a consensus on what to do on Greeno. We have talked to people based on our previous meeting. So we do have some different input. I think valued input that I don't think we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think we're starting from scratch. But I think there's some good input that we can kind of add some tweaks. Just with the holiday seasons, it's really tough to get that done. So we'll come up with a plan to try not to extend that too long. But we're gonna do that at the next council meeting. So that we'll have to look at the time frame. We kind of got two options for how to do that. There's a chance and we'll I'll put this idea out there, but not ask you to do it yet. In regards to the form-based codes, if we add a few other options than just one build-to line, if we do that, we might ask to create a small research committee based on planning commissioners to kind of sit down so we can kind of go over these things in detail, because there's plenty of standards out there, but when you just pull a generic standard, it needs to be adapted for here. And that's, we can give some recommendation, but it's really good to get feedback if we can do that. And that's one of those meetings that just takes some time. You know, this is not the venue to kind of go through that. We can present it to you, and then we can critique it, but to work through that, what it is just going to take a little workshop and some time.
That'd be a
if
good
that's what
idea.
we-
We could do that and maybe a city council person, a few staff members, and maybe one or two people from Greeno Road.
I think that would be wonderful.
How many people that were at at the last meeting that we had have now contacted y'all with any input? It was one the last time I talked to you, which really is discouraging.
5. I think there's a regular group, and I'll say, I think there's a lot more input being, we're just kind of speaking with the spokespeople right now. I think there's so many opinions out there, which is, it's great to have that dialogue, but, you know, it really becomes valued when you can speak one-on-one based on their particular property and what can be done and the impacts. So I think we're getting there.
All right, and discussion for proposed amendments to multiple occupancy projects.
And Commissioners, if you can indulge me just a minute, and Joe Led, if you could assist me and put the slideshow back on the PC here in the council chambers, please. And he's doing that now. We appreciate Joe's help. And Commissioners, you don't see what's going on behind the scenes, but Joe Led does a fantastic job for us.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
You go, Joe.
Well, and Commissioners, while he's pulling this up, I have to confess, he saved my rear end more than once because I discovered an error very late and allowed me to make a last-minute edit a couple times. And so it helped us tremendously with that. All right, Joe, we are there. Thank you, sir. That is awesome. So, Commissioners, what I have before you here is, this is not for consideration tonight because this is a pretty dramatic change. So I wanted to have the opportunity to discuss it with the Commission, and then, if it's the Commission's pleasure, ask for adoption next meeting. You've heard me say many times, and various staff members, when we are reviewing multiple occupancy projects, and you hear me say this ad nauseum, that this is a multiple occupancy project. It's not a traditional subdivision. So, and as you saw tonight, every time we have a multiple occupancy project, there are usually sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 conditions of approval. Well, here's why you have those conditions of approval. It's because multiple occupancy projects, we're reviewing it just like a traditional subdivision. So therefore, you have a drainage system. You have utilities and other infrastructure. You definitely have utilities. Many of the times is dedicated to the city. Sometimes you may or may not have a roadway dedicated to the city. You may have a lift station installed that is dedicated to the city. We may need various easements for utilities for infrastructure that is then dedicated to the city, so that way the city has access to that infrastructure. The MOP process does not contemplate a clean way to do that, so therefore we end up going through multiple conditions of approval. So, Commissioners, for your consideration, if you'll notice on your screen right now, what I've done is I've copied word for word Article 4, Section H of the subdivision regulations. So, as you see, paragraph 1, there's no change. But if you look at paragraph 2, this is talking about what is required to be submitted with a MOP. You'll notice item 2A. I've struck through site plan and replaced it with preliminary plat and plans. Now, that is the same wording used elsewhere in the subdivision regulations for a traditional subdivision. So item A, each preliminary plat and plan shall comply with the stormwater requirements. Paragraph B, each preliminary plat and plan shall comply with the traffic requirements. No change to item C. No change to item D or E. Item F, preliminary plat and plan shall otherwise conform to the terms of Article 1, Section A. Item G, preliminary plat and plans. Again, we're replacing the word site plan with preliminary plat and plans. Probably the most significant one is paragraph 3. Each now preliminary plat and plans shall be submitted in accordance with requirements of Section C and D of Article 4, hereof relating to preliminary and final plat submittals respectively. Period. The rest is a strike-through. MOP allows simultaneous approval, preliminary and final approval of a site plan. Notice I'm using air quotes, lowercase site plan, not talking about the formalized site plan review process in the zoning ordinance. We're talking about basically lowercase site plan, a drawing. What this proposed amendment does is essentially now matches the rest of the subdivision regulations in that someone bringing the commission an MOP, they will prepare a preliminary plat, prepare all the necessary construction drawings, so that way we as staff can review drainage, can review the various other requirements, technical requirements, drainage being very important. Then they build the MOP. Does not necessarily require they build the vertical construction, but they put in the improvements. Exactly. They don't have to build, they're not required to build the vertical construction, but they do have to put in the improvements. So that way the components that would then be dedicated back to the city, then we get a final plat. So therefore, this commission can review it, staff can review the as-built drawings, and then we have our as-built drawings. We have our recorded O&M plan and agreement for the stormwater ponds, and then we have a plat that's going to reflect any type of easements that Mr. Peterson needs, so that way both Mr. Peterson or a Riviera Utilities or another utility, any of those types of drainage and utility easements that are needed to have access to that, now we have it cleaned up in a nice, clean process. What is very dramatic, though, is that this also, here's the other effect, is that it puts a 2-year, now the 2-year time to build that as a traditional subdivision is also in effect. So we don't have, forgive the term, orphaned MOPs sitting out there unbuilt.
Holly will like that.
We don't have orphaned MOPs. So these very minor edits have that effect. And so, again, Commissioners, not for consideration tonight, but just for your information, what we'd like to do is bring this for consideration in the December meeting. Certainly happy to answer questions.
I have a question. Just wondering if there may not need to be additional language to describe this kind of situation, but we've seen recently that where it's not a subdivision, so it's not a subdivider, it's just somebody in the CBD building a building that has 3 units. So there's not a stormwater, there's not a subdivision. I don't know if there needs to be any special if we need to recognize the situations where it's actually has very little to do with it.
And that's a great question, Commissioners. That's a great question. And anticipation of that, there will be from time to time, it's possible, you will have an application that does trigger the unit count requirement of an MOP where no infrastructure is required to be built to make the MOP work, where everything is sitting there in the right-of-way and you just run laterals to it. What I would say in that type of situation, I think that is a reasonable request for a waiver for simultaneous preliminary and final approval, and because then the applicant would be able to provide the necessary supporting documents to explain that. So, and Commissioners, it's rare, but occasionally we do consider a traditional subdivision that might be 5 lots, but it's otherwise a minor subdivision, and we recommend simultaneous preliminary and final plat. We see one of those every now and then. We haven't seen one in about a year or so. So I would think that would be a similar situation there. If you had that situation where there's really no need to do that, then we could recommend preliminary and final approval. I still think that we need that plat because then we have a clear, approved, recorded document with an instrument number. But yeah, in those types of situations, I think that's a reasonable recommendation for a waiver.
Just like a two-lot minor subdivision.
Yes, sir. You could treat it just like a two-lot minor subdivision. You're not installing any,
Okay,
not
so we don't need
installing,
any more.
not installing any infrastructure. That would be a reasonable waiver request.
Okay.
Okay.
Looks good. All right, next item is.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Emily, election of, thank you, Buford. Emily, election of officers. Do I need to get somebody to nominate for the next meeting?
The full slate, please. Chair, vice chair, secretary.
For the next meeting?
That's up to y'all.
Oh, we have to do it at this meeting, because what we used to do is at the prior meeting, we get somebody to poll
Chair,
kind of by.
Paul.
Yeah, we didn't know it was coming.
Okay. All right. Election of officers. Does anybody want to make nominations for officers going forward?
Yeah, I would.
Yes, sir.
Don't want me to make all?
Sure.
I would move that we keep what we got.
I have a motion to keep what we got. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. And last item on the agenda, the 2020 agenda schedule and deadlines. Emily, does that look good to you? And
The only concern I have is for this coming November 26th deadline, which is Tuesday for the January meeting. That'd be the first one on your list. Is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, if we want to move that up a week, which would move it to the 19th, November 19th.
Which where?
The very first one, under submittal deadline. It says
Oh.
November 26,
Oh, I got it.
2019.
all right, so that would be basically 18 days now. Okay, does anybody have an issue with that?
Nope.
So you're gonna get some rude looks from the staff over there.
How long has that been, I'm sure that's been published before.
That was my
People that are
question.
thinking they have until the 26th, right?
Yeah, yes, they do, but we would notify, I'll send it out to my list.
Do we know of any, well, yeah, that's kind of a harsh, thing to give somebody
That's up to y'all.
much notice.
And that January 6th meeting is probably the national championship.
Probably
Or one of the
so.
playoff game, that usually seems to be.
Probably is.
As an Auburn fan, it doesn't matter if that's an
Monday
Auburn.
night, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd hate to miss that LSU game.
Yeah, right. Go Tigers, huh? All right, so change November 19th. Any other concerns or changes? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve these dates.
So moved.
What,
With the change or no?
do we have a sense of how many projects are in the pipeline aiming for November 26th?
We do not.
You guys haven't been speaking to anybody?
With the change. Emily, with the change.
With the change?
That was my motion.
I've got a motion with the change of November deadline, submittal of November 19th. Do I have a second?
We don't have any other options to move that to give them a little more time, so I don't understand where.
What day is Thanksgiving?
On Thursday. I mean, this would just be, it's really more for staff than it is for the
Right,
applicants.
no, I understand that. So the Thanksgiving day is the 26th?
No, it's the 28th.
28th. So normally this would be the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and that just makes it tough for y'all to.
It's just the way the calendar fell this year with Thanksgiving.
So this
Usually
is
it's
the
the week
Friday prior
after.
to? There's a lot of people be out of town that week. Is that what you're saying? This is the Friday prior?
Right, well, this is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. It just
No, the
puts-
26th is the Tuesday before.
Right, we would move it to a week before that, which is what we have anticipated for 2020, is to
Okay.
move it up. But I see what you're saying is
that's a good
we're
I mean, I'm
cutting
wondering,
it.
might be a
why not
middle
do like the
ground.
Yeah.
22nd or something like that? Would that,
Change day completely?
just change it to like that?
That Friday.
The Friday
Yeah.
of the week before.
Okay, I'm good with whatever.
Because, I mean, that way, that way they've got that solid week and, you know, and then so many people will be out of town for Thanksgiving. I think a lot of people
Right.
understand that.
22nd?
Typically, people turn it in early anyway for that week because they take off. But go for the 22nd?
So that date's the 22nd.
Got it?
Okay.
Yes.
I have a motion to change the November date for submittal deadline to the 22nd, and with that
I will
exception
second that.
approved. I have a motion and a second. Any further? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.